Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. Pleased to say I'm joined by Bernhard Boehm, who is Head of External Manufacturing for Animal Health and VP of 3PM at Boehringer Ingelheim. Bernhard's worked in many different roles at the company as site head and with responsibility for R&D project management, and prior to that has a background in regulatory and quality from Solvay. And I'm pleased to say Bernhard will be sharing his insights about external manufacturing networks at CDMO Live in May as well. Bernhard, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you very much, Luke. Happy to be here with you.
Great to see you. So I wonder if we could talk then a bit about your career. Most of your career, I suppose, within human pharma, and then after that you transitioned into animal health. But it'd be great to understand first a bit about your background.
Thanks, Luke. Yes, indeed. I've been working almost 20 years in human pharma in various roles, as you indicated already. A pharmacist by training, so kind of for me it was always clear that my career would bring me into the pharmaceutical industry. I've had the privilege to do many different things in human pharma, from product manufacturing, really hands-on, through some regulatory activities, quality, as you mentioned. I've been in R&D, overseeing a big part of our development pipeline for many years, and then moved into corporate roles in the, let's say, supply environment. Including lifecycle management for the Boehringer Ingelheim drugs. Now, 5 years ago, approximately, I had the opportunity to switch gears again. I've always enjoyed doing that throughout my career. As I just said, that was up to that point, I was always within human pharma. At the time in 2020, I had the opportunity to move to animal health, which I expected would be quite different. And I can tell you also after 5 years now, it is very different. There are, of course, also some common things, but it's different. And I guess that will be something we'll be talking about now in the course of this podcast. What in fact is different and what is more or less the same, right?
It'd be great to understand that. Before we do, I mean, you mentioned about working in R&D pipeline. What you're doing now is at commercial stage now.
Exactly. Yes. So as you probably know, it's not like throwing something over the fence, and probably in any industry that would work. In pharma, it doesn't work. It definitely doesn't work. Of course, there are interactions in preparation of launch, but naturally, supply comes in at a bit later stage. Yeah. So we are involved not in the, let's say, typical development activities like clinical development, but of course we are being contacted early enough, way before launch date, typically 2 years, roundabout, depending on the technology, if it's standard or if it's non-standard, so that we have enough time to prepare to find the right partners if we go external. I mean, we also have internal networks. So first question is, will we go internal or rather external? And if we go external, what do we need and when do we need it? So that's why, yes, the biggest part is operational day-to-day work with existing products on the market, but there's always, hopefully, always a part of preparing new products to come.
Approximately how many products would Boehringer Ingelheim be producing, manufacturing at any point, just within the animal health space?
Well, it depends on what you call products. If we say this is a product, means a brand, or let's say different formulations of a brand. Actually, I've never counted them across the whole portfolio, but it will probably be a couple of hundred products. Indeed, really. I'm not talking about SKUs. That's many thousands. But this is really different, let's say, different formulations or within the brand. It's quite complex. Many more products than I've typically seen in human pharma.
Is part of that because different animal species need to have their own particular versions of the drugs?
Of course, yeah, that is part of it. So obviously, it's not only one species, but many. Typically, we have two types of businesses in animal health, which are also very different. One is livestock. The other one is companion animals. Horses are kind of closer to companion animals, but not exactly the same, obviously, as dogs and cats. And some companies also in the livestock area, we have the typical things like poultry, cattle, and swine. Some companies also have aquaculture. Boehringer Ingelheim does not have aquaculture in its portfolio. So that comes already, I mean, just looking at the number of species I just mentioned, right? So dogs, cats, horses, cattle, swine, poultry, yeah, and then some exotic things. Sometimes we have, for example, products which are used for treatment of camels.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're really, really interesting niche also sometimes. Then it probably is almost to be expected that the portfolio becomes bigger and bigger because I mean there are some diseases which are common across all animals, but there are also many which are very very species specific. Yeah? And so there are, let's say, diseases which are specific to poultry and others specific to cats and dogs, and they need different treatment. And even if the disease is the same in cats and dogs, it's not necessarily that they can take the same drug because the same active ingredient can work pretty well and be safe in dogs, but can be even dangerous or toxic in cats. That's not always the case, but there are cases where you cannot just take the same product and treat the same disease in another species.
Yeah.
So that drives a lot of complexity in our portfolio by nature already.
Very interesting. How is this space regulated? And I guess talking about the differences for those who are familiar with human pharma to animal health, how does regulatory requirements change between the two?
Let me say, from a supply perspective, we typically first look at the regulatory piece around GXP and supervision of manufacturing activities. There, content-wise, I would say it's not very, very different from the human pharma world. There are some differences, but they are not huge. It can be. It is in most countries. It is a different authority which regulates animal drugs compared to human drugs, or at least, and sometimes it's really a different agency. Sometimes it's a different division of the same agency. So in Europe, for example, it's EMEA, but different divisions.
Okay.
In the US, depends actually on the disease, on the treatment, because some drugs are regulated by FDA, again, special division for veterinary health, but some drugs treatments are regulated by USDA, Department of Agriculture. So that already drives also regulatory wise sometimes differences, which can go up to even, let's say, differences in technical requirements, in the way how premises are set up, are designed, tests that are being made. But overall, I would say it's not completely different. Some things come, let's say, some specifics come rather with the products we're dealing with, certain type of vaccines. But vaccines also exist in the human pharma world, and there's also vaccines who require special biopharmaceutical safety measures. So that's not fundamentally different. Yeah. Yes. When it comes to regulatory in the sense of approving drugs, clinical testing, development, first of all, I'm not an expert here. Probably much less than I know much less than I would know in the human pharma world. There are differences in clinical development, typically shorter. There are differences in documentation that is needed to get approval, but the fundamental principles apply in both worlds. So drugs need to be safe and efficacious.
Yes. The market dynamic is fairly different as well. One of the things about animal health is that it has much lower price margins typically compared to human.
Yeah.
Without going too much into, the different pricing strategies in different countries, what does that overall mean to the manufacturing side of the business? How does that impact the business strategies you have around external manufacturing, that price differential?
Price is one important thing. So margins are typically lower in animal health than in human pharma. And I'm talking about not about generics. Yeah, human pharma generics
Mm,
is obviously a different world, also with very low margins. I'm talking about, let's say, patent protected products, as Boehringer Ingelheim has them also in its human pharma portfolio. So that's the comparison I make here. Um, Animal health, from my perspective, as from a business type, is much closer to fast-moving consumer goods
mm,
or OTC business in the human pharma than it is to prescription drug human pharma. Yeah, so and that drives the dynamics throughout the organization. It also comes with that price pressure or that different margin that you mentioned. But it's not only this aspect which plays a role. It's also about the nature of the business, as I just said, faster, more dynamic, different types of customers. Yeah, a fast changing world also outside in the world of our customers. A
mm.
lot of consolidation out there, and then something which is also special here is that we have those two branches of livestock where we have different customers, different dynamics, and um, even more pressure on margin. I mean, it's something we as a consumer um, we have an influence on that, right? So we all expect to buy good quality, but also not too expensive meat.
Mm.
Yeah, at least most people want to buy not too expensive meat if they eat meat. And you probably know. I mean, everybody should be aware that this comes with a huge pressure also on farmers, on producers, on meat producers around the world. So um, they cannot afford spending a huge amounts of money for vaccination or treatment of their animals, and that comes with a very different price dynamics also compared to pets,
Mm.
where pet owners typically are willing to pay more for treating their pets, and they would are also willing to treat pets for conditions where a farmer probably would need to take a decision to kill the animal rather than to treat it. As much as we may dislike it, but that's the reality. So um, that's why I would say depends really on where you look at,
Mhm.
but also in the pets arena or generally companion animals, despite having a different dynamic, it's still probably higher pressure than in human pharma and different margins.
Mm.
Now, the second thing is that if we deal with large customers like the big online chains, yeah, in the US and Europe and elsewhere, like Amazon, like pets in the US, it's yeah, it requires also our supply chain to be set up for that kind of business.
Mhm.
It's different, obviously, than if you deal with individual veterinarians, which are still a very important partner for us in distribution of drugs. But as you can see, it's a variety of different customers that we are dealing with, and they they all need different approaches, yeah,
Mhm.
in the way how we supply them, how flexible we are. Talking about changes of packaging material, packaging concepts or packaging materials. So that drives also part of the complexity that we are dealing with,
Mhm.
and that's why I said it's probably closer to OTC in the pharma world or to fast-moving consumer
Yeah,
goods.
yeah. What advice would you have, Bernard, for others who are trying to deal with the supply chain complexity that you're outlining in the animal health market? Some of the lessons that you've learned along the way, best practices for how to manage a portfolio like this.
Fundamentally, you have to follow the same rules and principles for setting up supply chains as you do in other pharma areas, even human pharma. So the principles are the same, um, but probably you need to pay a bit more attention to things like um, speed of processes, especially when it comes to changes, um, stock management. Um, that's probably where I would say it's probably a bit different, or could be a bit different than in other areas of the pharmaceutical industry. Otherwise, I would say we see the same elements, probably with more more pressure behind, or more a stronger need to excel. Like I'm speaking about typical KPIs like OTIF, or how well we are able to respond to customer orders, how timely we are. I'm talking about lead time optimization, to be as fast as possible, but also to save cost, to bring down cost. I'm talking about inventory management. I'm talking about stock management, dual supply, to be able to respond flexibly and to increase resilience of the supply chain. And something which is maybe even more important than in human pharma is the aspect of portfolio, active portfolio management. I'm talking about pruning also at the end of the life cycle. Because with that huge complexity, there's even more pressure, or it's even more dangerous to end up with non-value adding complexity. Because complexity as such, if it's value adding, I guess we all agree, that's not a bad thing. You just need to handle it. Um, but with that inherent, and I would say most of the time, value adding complexity, there's also a higher danger probably that the portfolio will explode, right? So PPO, portfolio optimization, plays a very, very important role here to keep it under control, and also to be able to manage it, and to keep costs somewhat under control.
I suppose it's very easy to have a long tail of products in this market. How often do you go through that portfolio optimization process? Is that sort of like an annual process? How does that work?
It is an annual process, yeah, and needs to be. Yeah, so it's a constant throughout the year. We're constantly identifying products or SKUs, or sometimes also suppliers, where we say we're below critical mass,
Yeah.
whatever that means. Yeah, because it can mean it's below critical mass, or below certain, let's say, profitability margins. It can be that we no longer have let's say, sufficient performance in the markets. But it can also be that driven from a CMO perspective, that we are saying, look, we have now a portfolio, or maybe even only one product at one particular CMO, and the effort for managing the CMO. And there's a base effort which you always have coming, for example, from the requirements from a quality and EHS perspective. No matter how much you do with that CMO, and no matter how much you spend and how much volume you produce at that CMO, you still have a certain, let's say, base amount of effort. And then at some point, that will kill your profitability. So we have to, and we are also looking at that from a CMO perspective, and take that view into account. And then, of course, we have to see whether the products affected, if we terminate a relationship, would be pruned, or whether we find other solutions, which could mean, for example, transferring that to another partner.
Be good to understand more on the CMO side, how that works for your business. How many CMOs typically would there be in your network? Are you working to increase that number, reduce that number? What's the current state of play?
There's probably no numbers which you could simply put out and say that's the ideal number of CMOs, because It will depend on many factors. One factor is what's the strategy of the company? How and what's the supply strategy? How is the distribution between internal production and external? And there's a strategy behind typically. We also have a strategy saying what typically the percentage approximately should be between internal net and external. Then the second is it's about the technologies. Also, there typically companies have strategies saying there are some technologies which we want to keep in-house, yeah, because we, for example, we have special knowledge, we own IP on the technology. But it can also be the opposite. It can be that we are saying for strategic reasons we do not want to invest into a certain technology. We outsource that completely. And then we have in the middle something like opportunistic outsourcing, where we would outsource rather because we want to have dual supply, more to have more resilience, because we want to split volumes, because we want to be closer to our customers and cannot do that with our internal sites. So there are many, many reasons why we would say part of this goes into internal, part goes into external. And that drives ultimately the number of CMOs. Now, there are companies, not Boehringer, but there are companies in the animal health world who are outsourcing some 80%, right? And that, of course, would also probably drive kind of the number of CMOs. As a responsible person for external manufacturing, I tend to say I personally would still want to reduce the number a little bit. We're currently at around about 80 or 70 CMOs and more than 30 API suppliers. So it's a bit more than 100 external partners. But the number alone doesn't tell you the whole story. It's more about the spend distribution. So forget for a moment about the exact number. I would say I would always try to strive for having the majority or a large number of external partners with and a spend that is important enough for our partners also to become attractive and important business partners. It's good for them if they have a customer who also has a certain can bring certain volumes, and help them to do good business. It's also good for us, right? So it's more about that, trying to avoid that we have too many with very, very low spend. But it's not black and white. So if I look at our current portfolio of CMOs, there's still some way to go. So I would still want to consolidate volumes a little bit more towards the larger partners or the to-be larger partners, because in the end, it's not only size, it's at least as important, so size and cost, but it's at least as important to have reliable partners who provide good quality at a reasonable competitive price and who are performing well, performing in the sense of delivery. So price and cost is not the only aspect which drives that. It's also the other elements. And that's, I mean, Luke, we have talked previously a little bit. That we're coming from a very, very large number of CMOs in the past. In the last 5 years, that was even before I joined animal health, there were more than 250 CMOs, which was clearly for what we are doing and for the part that we are outsourcing way too much. So that's why we have done a lot of work over the last 3-4 years to bring that number down to where we are today. Now I would say we're in quite good shape, but there's still some opportunities which we're looking into. And on the other hand, I mean, it's not always going in one direction. We also have needs for other technologies, future technologies, which will then eventually also bring new CMOs into our portfolio. So it's a living portfolio, but there's still a slight interest, I would say, to further bring it down.
Yeah, it sounds like the overall direction is going from a very fragmented transactional supplier base and trying to work with a smaller group of select partners on a more strategic approach to supply management. How do you do that with your supply network? How do you encourage CMOs and other key partners to work with you in a more strategic way? Do you bring them together and share your roadmap with them? What's your approach been?
I think I mentioned a bit earlier that in order to have a strategic relationship, there need to be two partners who see that as a strategic relationship. It's obviously not enough for us as Boehringer to say, oh, you are a strategic supplier to us, if the partner doesn't see us as their strategic customer. So that is a first point. And in order to get to the point where both partners really see the value of having a strategic partnership, starts with the question, how do we create a value on both sides? I mean, we all know the almost buzzword of win-win relationships or situations. But that's basically it, right? Of course, we want to have prices as low as possible. I also talked about the other elements which are very important to us. At the same time, also our partners want to grow, want to strive, want to earn money. So we have to find a way how we can really create that value on both sides. And we can discuss, and there are many elements which play a role. But in the end, one thing is overwhelmingly important, and that's volume. It really comes always down to that point of having enough volume so that that the whole story is really interesting and attractive. Yeah? And with the volume also typically come attractive and competitive prices. Now, what makes it strategic then, from my point of view, is that it's not only volume today and tomorrow, so on a short term, but it's also constantly looking strategically ahead. That means 5 to even sometimes longer, 10 years, and to keep the dialogue and talk about future opportunities. Because as we have discussed earlier today, products go through their life cycle, portfolios change, and today's blockbuster and volume driver in 5 years might be a shrinking product. So we have to think ahead and also to discuss with our strategic suppliers about how we can keep that relationship healthy and attractive on both sides. So that is where I would say this more long-term view and the commitment on both sides, treat it as a long-term relationship rather than a transactional. Yeah, it's never really short-term in our industry, but more like a transactional or even opportunistic relationship. That's the key for me, where it makes a difference. Yeah, having that relationship where you can talk on about the future and make plans together about the future. And if I look at it from the other side, it's about what technologies, for example, does the supplier think about investing in, and how we get together so that it matches best our needs. So that's where I would consider it becoming a strategic relationship.
Very interesting. Thank you for that. Looking ahead, I mean, we were just talking there about partnerships for the medium to long term. What do you see as being some of the most significant trends and challenges as you're putting your plans together? I mean, be that around geopolitical challenges, there's enough of those
Mhm.
at the moment, this week,
Yes.
every week, or technological. What are the things which are shaping how you see this business developing?
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned the geopolitical topics, and yes, indeed, unfortunately, we have an increasing number at this moment, an increasing and faster increasing number of, unfortunately, rather obstacles and risks
Mm,
coming up. But I wouldn't go too much into that. It's well known. It's either well known or it's not yet enough known. If we speak
yeah,
about the tariffs which have been announced just a couple of hours ago, it's not yet clear enough in all cases what that really will mean. But I would be surprised if that would have a positive impact.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what I can definitely say.
Potentially, could it mean that you need to rethink where you have manufacturing? I mean, talking about, manufacturing more in the US if it's to deal with that market, for example.
Well, at least in the process of taking decisions for manufacturing sites or partners, the geographical location. I mean, it has always been one aspect in our decision matrix.
Mm,
What's the geographical and the location? It's also about being close to our customers. So that has always been one of the elements, but it probably weighs more
mm,
now than it has been in the past. Remains to be seen whether that eventually will really drive even to change existing supply chains because of that.
mhm.
That's not yet the case as far as I see, because nobody knows probably well enough how this will eventually really materialize. So it's a bit early, but of course, we're watching those things closely and we're taking that more into account and
Mm,
more, yeah, we take that more into account than we have done it maybe 5 years ago.
yeah.
Um, so that's certainly one part. The other part, now looking, you asked for the trends and
Mm,
challenges. If we look at the kind of really now very animal health specific, because what you just said was not specific to animal health, right? So that's uh, not even specific to pharma. Yeah?
sure.
It's just that pharma, to make that comment, pharma typically has longer lead times to make changes.
Mm,
And the more you go towards the API, the longer it takes and the more expensive it is to make a change.
mm, mm,
But otherwise, it's not absolutely specific. Now, if we look at animal health and the real big trends, then I would say one thing is that we see global population further increasing. Um, in some areas of the world, much more significantly than in others. But overall, global population increases and is expected to further increase.
mm,
Why is that important? Because it comes also with an increased demand for animal proteins. And even though from a European perspective, you might say, yeah, everybody's going vegan and vegetarian. Yes, and I won't comment on that. That's not our topic today. But if you look globally, yeah, then there's clearly an increasing demand for animal proteins, yeah?
mhm.
And especially in emerging countries where this has a whole different, let's say, context as well. So
Can't remember the figures, but being at a conference years ago, very similar to what you're saying, Bernard, it was, saying, yeah, even if the meat intake in certain European countries is slowing down, perhaps for China, just to add on like a couple of percentage points, suddenly it's
exactly,
market shifts.
exactly. Yes, and other emerging markets as well.
Of course, yeah.
They are also typically or often the countries or markets where population growth is most expressed. Yeah?
Mm,
So that is one of the big trends which has an impact on the industry, and that's not only about volumes. There's also need for a portfolio, for a good portfolio, and for innovation. Yeah, so there's need to have good, efficient, and of course price effective treatment for those animals, meat producing animals. Emerging markets will probably continue to play a more and more significant role. And we also see that economic power is shifting over the last couple of years. Now, China, I guess, on place number 2 in economic power, if I'm not completely wrong. Yeah, and so there has been a lot of shift over the last years in economic power, and that comes also with need to adapt our portfolios in the animal health industry, not completely, but we do not need to change completely, but we have to adapt. We have to change our way of communicating with our customers because there are cultural aspects which are different. We need to understand the regional needs of those emerging markets, which sometimes, and I'm not an expert, but I can imagine very well that the regional needs might be very, very different from what we have here in Europe or in the United States. So those are two elements. Then we also see, and I see that in my own family, that our younger generations, as always, young generations are different from the generations before, and today's young generations have a very different behavior when it comes to shopping, when it comes to use of technology. I mean, they're digital natives. They will use more AI. Yeah? For us, that's brand new. For that, of course, for all of us, it's relatively new. But they will probably adapt that much faster than older generations. Yeah, and that will also drive different or develop different generational needs, with the need also to come up with solutions and channels that are more tailored towards the needs of those generations and their behaviors. And it will also impact our future workforce. Yeah? So it's not only looking at the customer, it's also looking inside our companies. The young people now joining our organizations sometimes have different needs. They have different priorities in life, and that has an impact on the way how we act, how we communicate. So that is an important aspect. This one, again, not necessarily only for animal health. The next trend, which comes into my mind, is urbanization. And also here, emerging markets, probably it's most pronounced. So cities, mega cities growing, rural areas losing inhabitants, people moving into big cities with very small living space. And for animal health, that comes with let's say, an impact on the pets which people can have. I mean, if you are living in Tokyo in a 10 square meter apartment, you cannot afford to have a Danish dog in your apartment.
Or a camel, for that matter.
Or a camel, right? Yeah. Yeah, it would be a bit difficult to have it in your apartment. So that drives also the type of pets, which are to be treated, and that has a very direct impact on our portfolio. Yeah, it's different types of products, probably it's different doses, etc., etc. So that definitely will have an impact. There will be different need for product properties, perhaps increasing need for having comprehensive health solutions, not only looking at drug treatment, but having more, let's say, holistic solutions for our customers, which go beyond the drug. Things that many animal health pharma companies are already working on. Boehringer doesn't make an exception here. Climate change, that is, let's say, the counter effect. We talked about increased need for meat on the one hand. On the other hand, we have this discussion about climate change and the impact of livestock of the livestock on the CO2 footprint.
Mm.
So that is an aspect where we as an industry cannot just close our eyes. We need to see what the impact is and where the trend is going to. And finally, I mentioned artificial intelligence earlier, but also this one. I mean, this is something now. It's the new thing to be in. Yeah. Also for consultancies at this moment, everybody's talking about AI. Yes, of course, it will have an impact on our industry, not only on our customers, but also on our industry, the way how we are doing things. It comes with great opportunities. I can imagine opportunities in diagnostics, in public veterinary health, like being able to detect faster outbreak of infections, diseases. It can help us with innovation and research and development. It will help us to become more efficient in supply, because we can have easier, let's say, access to data, and we can process more data and get results and interpretation of data. So there's so many things where artificial intelligence will have also a positive impact. Yeah, it also comes with risks, but it will definitely have an impact. Yeah, so we should take advantage of that where we can and where it makes sense, and we should be mindful of the impact it will or might have on development of our business.
In manufacturing, Bernard, because it's typically, certainly within GMP regulated manufacturing conditions, it's been quite hard for AI to make an impact. Certainly, if you compare it to drug discovery, where you can, cycle through trillions of molecules. Have you been working on anything, or have you seen AI being useful yet?
Personally, not yet. Yeah, which simply because in external manufacturing, you rarely see. I haven't seen any of our CMOs using that, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. No, I cannot give you practical examples. I mean, it's clear whenever something is used, which is GXP regulated, in a GXP regulated process, you probably know as well as I do that this comes with certain requirements, validation, etc., etc. So this for sure will make implementation a bit more time consuming and energy consuming, but it will not prevent, it should not prevent those things to be used in that area. I haven't seen anything. There are things which I could imagine that are extremely interesting. Yeah, just to name one thing which comes into my mind is documentation review, batch record review, detecting errors in documentation. Those, but there's probably many more use cases. It's just a matter of implementation, and what it takes to implement.
Fascinating. Bernard, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Luke.
Thank you. And looking forward to you joining us at CDMO Live in Rotterdam next month.
Yes, looking forward to see you too.
Experience the future of contract manufacturing at CDMO Live 2025. Join us at the World Trade Centre Rotterdam on May the 7th and 8th, 2025 for an exclusive event that brings together the sharpest minds in biopharma outsourcing. For 2 days filled with market insights, best practices and partnering. So head to cdmolive.com to download the agenda and to book your ticket.